Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Buenos dias to everybody. Thank you for joining us for another wonderful virtual conversation as part of Latino Conservation Week. This year is a very special year for Latino Conservation Week because we're celebrating 10 years of cultura, comunidad, y conservation. And we're so excited to be joined by our friends with Green Latinos, in particular, Pedro Hernandez and Olivia Juarez. Welcome. How are you both doing?
Thank you so much, Christian. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm feeling great. Happy Latino Conservation Week.
Yeah, happy Latino Conservation Week, everybody, from beautiful Fresno, California.
Wonderful. Well, if you'd like to introduce yourselves, like just a little bit more, like share with us a little bit about your journey, and then what role you have within Green Latinos. Let us know. Pedro, would you like to go?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hi again, everybody. My name is Pedro. I'm the public lands advocate with Green Latinos. And part of my work is helping advocate for national environmental level protections, expansions of national parks, creating new parks, and ensuring that nature's benefits reach all Americans, including communities historically disenfranchised by issues like racism, colonization, and redlining. And a little bit about my journey is I have a Latin American history degree, and I used to be a high school history teacher. So I was always involved in highlighting like our community's role in the development and just like the course of human history, in particular in North America, but also really engaged with like community members on the ground, whether it's parents or students. And around 2016, I transitioned full time to the nonprofit sector, and I've been working on local, state, regional, and federal policy advocacy for environmental justice, climate action, and expanding, again, nature's benefits to communities of color. So it's been a little bit of a journey, but I love always keeping the ties of education and how we can use history and our ancestral knowledge to not only like position ourselves as advocates and just people in the present, but also help dream of a better future for us all. So I'm happy to be here, and really looking forward to expanding on these topics in the discussion to come.
Well, great to have you. Olivia, how about you?
Thank you both. Hi, everybody. My name is Olivia Juarez. I'm the Public Land Program Director at Green Latinos and a longtime Green Latinos member, as well as a volunteer for Latino Outdoors Salt Lake City. So I'm super excited to be here with you all. My journey comes with all of the generations of those before me, especially relating back to my grandparents. On one side, my family's immigrants coming from rural Mexico, coming from a very like based in the land, farming and doing work with the land relationship and way of life in Mexico. And on the other side, basically the same thing, except in Nuevo Mexico. Um, my ancestors have always had really reciprocal dependence on the land. They were able to live because of the rivers on both sides of them. I remember on my grandparents' 50th anniversary, we were camping and I was in the trailer with my tio Robert, and he says, Mijita, like I didn't even have shoes growing up like that fit me when I was a kid, but we had two creeks on both sides of us. Like we always ate really good. And that was because of the public land that surrounded them. So, despite the fact that on all of my ancestors, especially like from my grandparents' generation and those before, come from like a very outdoors because of necessity background. It's what it looks like for us is like outdoors because of culture, continuing to go camping for the anniversaries and the graduations and everything. So that led me to have a complete love and for nature, for our public lands, and to see a lot of opportunity and hope for creating the world that we need to see in the face of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis through simply allowing nature to be nature. So I'm born and raised, normally based in Salt Lake City, though I am calling in right now from Ato Rey, a neighborhood in San Juan, Puerto Rico, where I've been spending the summer learning Spanish, which is also another part of my journey in about 7 years working specifically on like Latino love for conservation, Latino-led conservation, is reconnecting to part of my culture, which includes my language. So really excited to be here with you all and share a little bit about what's going on with the Green Latinos effort to take back Cinco de Mayo.
All right. Before we dive into Take Back Cinco de Mayo, today's theme for Latino Conservation Week is advocacy afuera. And I wanted to ask you both quickly, what does advocacy afuera mean to you? When you hear that phrase, what jumps to your mind? Olivia?
Well, when I think about being afuera, it makes me think of being out, like being proud, being out, including in the context of like LGBTQ-ness. And so advocacy afuera for me right now means that you are out loud and proud about the issues that you care about. You are out loud and proud about the solutions that you see in the world. And through that action, you are bringing others with you.
Yeah, and I can take a stab at this. And I love the alliteration here, but for me, I think the first like concept that comes to mind is like connection to nature. Because in order to advocate in any capacity, in order to whether it's on a scale of picking up trash by the river or going to Washington D.C. to express a need that you need to be addressed for your local environment. It comes down to being connected with understanding how nature works and understanding how we are interrelated with the plants and water and soil and animals as well too, right? And so I think when advocacy afuera, like to me again that connectedness, and you can like really advocate for the outdoors, whether you're outside or whether you're taking 5 minutes to call your congressman or writing an email or getting your friends together to like go outdoors and spend the weekend camping as well too, right? Because I think like a really important part of advocacy, like not only the more traditional sense where you're lobbying Congress, but also like advocating for your own community, right? So you can bring more joy and connection and just like bond building as well too. So those are some of the big high level concepts for me that come with advocacy afuera. And then also I will just say like I love animals, and so like I definitely like try to incorporate a lens of advocacy afuera for me, and just kind of connecting to even like journey and storytelling. I always tell people like one of my early like connections to nature, because I grew up in a trailer park that was in the middle of ag land, that was on the side of a highway, on the side of a dairy, and on the side of a junkyard. So I had all like the worst like nature depriving land uses, right? And so one of the actual connections for me to nature was through the hit smash TV show Pokemon, where it's really just like exploring nature, like befriending animals, and that was one of the like early seeds for me that like helped connect to the outdoors as well too. So yeah, I'm glad this is one of the highlight themes for the week.
Thank you both for sharing that and what it means to you. I think for me, one of the fascinating and reinforcing things that I keep seeing throughout the week in these conversations is that you can have the same word and so many different ways to interpret that, and that just shows the beauty of diversity of opinion, of background, of influence. So I appreciate you both sharing that. And now let's dig in to Take Back Cinco de Mayo. Technically, the hashtag is Take Back Cinco. Olivia, can you tell us what this is, what this movement is, how Green Latinos came about with this? Let's dive right in.
Absolutely. So Take Back Cinco, or I should say, Cinco de Mayo is originally celebrated to recognize the anniversary of La Batalla de Puebla in 1862, in which an army of trained and guerrilla Mexican soldiers and volunteers were victorious over the French Empire in the fight for Mexico's autonomy. But since the 1970s and 80s, especially in the United States, the commemoration has been hijacked by food and beverage companies who have attempted to transform Cinco de Mayo into things like Cinco de Drinko or Drinko de Mayo. Really, Cinco de Mayo in its commemoration of a battle is not widely celebrated throughout Mexico. A lot of people here tend to think that it's the Mexican Independence Day, it's a day to drink, it's a day to party. But the reason that Cinco de Mayo is so popularized right now is because of commercial interest in selling our cultures right back to us and right back to anybody, to commodify Mexican culture. And what I think also led to was to create more Mexican centricity and more monolithization of Latino communities into thinking, popularizing Mexican heritage to the point that it kind of becomes the default for Latinidad, which we know is not the truth at all, and that Latinidad is very diverse within itself. So at Green Latinos, we believe that our Latino communities across all nations, all cultures, recognize the hijacking of Cinco de Mayo as cultural appropriation and cultural incompetence. So Green Latinos brought our members together in recognition of our mission, working hacia la liberación ambiental, to uphold hope and vision for our futures, where our cultures and the opportunities in front of us to advance climate justice, to protect our cultures, and the ability for future generations to do that, free from climate disaster, from racism, xenophobia, and other forms of oppression. So the Green Latinos community is aiming to reclaim or take back Cinco de Mayo. And we are hinging a lot of efforts on taking back Cinco de Mayo to pivot towards one of the greatest issues of our lifetime, the climate crisis. We are encouraging in this campaign for everybody to look to the Batalla de Puebla for inspiration as we stand on the front lines of one of the most severe battles of our lifetime, the loss of biodiversity, the most hot days recorded on Earth happening in the last week plus. In addition to more destruction, violation, and exacerbation of the injustices that are surrounded with the climate crisis. Against the odds, at the Batalla de Puebla, the under-resourced and outnumbered forces fighting for Mexico successfully defeated the French Empire. And I want to repeat that. The Batalla de Puebla was outnumbered. They were out-resourced. The French army had way more power than them, but the fight for Mexico still prevailed. And so they beat the odds, which implies not just the defense of the nation state Mexico, but it also implies physical victories at the Batalla de Puebla, victories for land, for water, for air, for food, and for culture in El País, against the odds. So we know that there's a long way to go. For example, in our fight for 30 by 30, 30% conserved lands and waters in their natural state nationally by 2030, in order to meet our climate and biodiversity conservation goals and the needs, not just of the states, but of the globe. So in taking back Cinco de Mayo, Green Latinos has issued a declaration to which anybody can sign even today, that expresses that we are reclaiming Cinco de Mayo, that we are asserting that it is a day to take inspiration from the Batalla de Puebla, to fight for our climate futures, and for defending our cultures as well, and ending cultural appropriation everywhere. We're also aiming to uplift Cinco de Mayo as a day of action, a day where anybody can participate in different activities and storytelling about what it means to be proud of and defend your cultures and stop appropriation from happening, as well as being active in the battle for healthy futures. And then finally, and most recently at the Green Latinos National Summit, several weeks ago, we brought together all of our members to give input on what this campaign looks like. I definitely want to emphasize that, like, the Take Back Cinco de Mayo campaign isn't a Green Latinos thing. It's the community's thing. We're hoping that this is a movement that we just happen to be catalyzing right now that'll carry on into many future generations, such as, we're taking inspiration from the way that the Indigenous liberation movement, since the Civil Rights Movement, has worked and worked and worked for Indigenous liberation up to the point that Columbus Day is now recognized federally as Indigenous Peoples Day, as it should be. And so we know that this is something that it's going to take a movement. It's going to take a whole nation to move forward and transform Cinco de Mayo away from Cinco de Drinko and into something that is more wholesome, true to the histories, and relevant to the times right now, of being inspired by a really outstanding moment in history at the Batalla de Puebla.
I love that, and thank you for walking us through all of that. I'm my roots in Mexico, and I'd mentioned this to you at the Green Latino Summit. My family comes from revolutionaries. My grandfather was the son of a revolutionary, and my great grandfather fought in the second Mexican Revolution under General Cárdenas and against Huerta. And so for me, this is part of the through line. This is part of the history, part of my cuento. And I love the terms, like even words that you use, like declaration as opposed to a pledge, the movement as opposed to a campaign. All these things are incredibly important because there is a historical through line. Like when you look at the Batalla de Puebla, there famously there were the Zapotecas that had their machetes and their rocks and their old rifles taking on the largest imperial army in the world at that time, reclaiming their land, their dignity, and their rights. And so I love the fact that Green Latinos is kind of recruiting a lot of other people. And I've seen it mentioned, that why are we using the term battle? Why is this, why are we leaning into that kind of language? It is. Let's be honest. This is a fight for tierra y libertad. This is a fight where the stakes of inaction are too high to even consider. Where we need to get organized, we need to work together, we need to be on the forward motion and bring people along with us as we face, not the French imperial army, but the forces of negative climate impact and climate injustice. So I love the fact that Green Latinos is, you all have such a great reputation for organizing and for effecting change and working with grassroots and legislative levels. So I love the fact that you all are doing this and, kind of empowering us all at the same time to assert our histories and to draw our own through lines. And Pedro, we talked about it just a little bit earlier, but also expanding the conversation to, like, not just Cinco de Mayo and the 5th of May in the 1800s in one battle in one country, but what other Cinco de Mayos might there be out there? Do you have any thoughts on that? The Latin American battle?
Yeah, actually, I do. I have lots of thoughts. But I think, like, I want to keep weaving in the narrative of like storytelling, right? Because there are stories that we have as individuals, there's stories that we have like as families and as like neighborhoods and communities, but also just like stories like as a people, right? As a like the largest form of collective, and like how do we like tell our stories? How do we position ourselves within like this like larger existence throughout time and throughout the present? And so, I just we have to be like we have to remember our history, right? As a people that have indigenous roots to this hemisphere, right? That we like our ancestors existed in this hemisphere for thousands of years before the first colonizers stepped foot in the Caribbean or in what we now know as Latin America. And so the history after that, right, has been a history of dispossession and oppression and marginalization and division, right? But even in that larger context, right, we have a history of resilience and resistance and communal love, right? That has been, I would argue, a, if not the most significant reason why, as a people, we are still here, right? For the reasons why, sometimes we sacrifice one thing to have a better future, or for why we like take a stand knowing that there might be potential like backlash, because we know that there is an injustice, right? And so I think like, I want to be very intentional about like Cinco de Mayo, this particular campaign. Like this is a case study, right? It's not the only example. And so we just staying in the boundaries of Mexico, right? We have the Zapatistas, right? In Southern Mexico, right? Like incorporating like threads of like indigenous resistance or land management reform, right? We have the Sandinistas in like Nicaragua as another example of, highlighting one particular, person, right? But as using this person or the ideas that this one person represents as a larger example of what as a people is sought after, or what as some of the ideals that people sought are seeking for, right? Or like hoping to realize. And so again, like I think there are tons of different examples. I mean, even in the United States, right? Like, there's Martin Luther King Day, right? And people are not like, calling themselves like Lutheristas, right? But there are tons of people who are, who subscribe to the ideals of like nonviolent action, right? And so this is something that, again, I think just as a people, right? Like there are like people maybe we idealize potentially, but again, I think like the ideals that they do represent are beautiful and are worth like remembering and considering and incorporating into like our lives as much as possible, right? Because again, I think like this is also another opportunity for us to like play more of an active role in determining like our fate. Because again, like I always explain Cinco de Mayo in this way: it was not Mexican independence, but it was an important deciding factor in Mexico retaining its independence, right? And so when we think about like self-determination, really, I think like that's one of the highest like conceptual things as people we can like try to realize, because we have autonomy over determining like our future. And I think like just as people who have been colonized or as oppressed as well too, just even like really leaning into like this self-determination when it's been like taken from us legally, like politically, socially, culturally as well too. This is one of the like main forms of resistance we can begin to like realize to hopefully reach like this better future that we all want.
So we're talking about storytelling, and there's just so much to consider, because in a way, Cinco de Mayo, what that has become is a rewritten history, and it is the erasure of history. And for the first time in the history of history, we have digital tools available to us now that we can write our own histories. We've been able to, and our ancestors and their ancestors wrote their histories, but we have a way to connect instantaneously and publish without the traditional barriers, without the traditional green lights and red or green tape, to be able to reach other people's eyes. And so we have an opportunity that maybe generations before us didn't quite have, which is to communicate all these stories. Everyone has a story to tell. But the fact that we can communicate those stories and share them instantaneously with the touch of a button, or, if somebody doesn't have a computer or a laptop or a phone, they can show somebody theirs. I think there's just something incredibly powerful in that. And so one of the things with Latino Outdoors, we've got our storytelling program. It's called Yo Cuento. I count, I matter, I have a story to tell. And a lot of that work is rewriting the history that just doesn't include us. You go to try to Google Latine in national parks, and that doesn't exist, because Latine was not a term used 50 years ago, but also because we were purposefully erased from these kinds of histories. So the fact that you all are, leaning into the storytelling aspect of Take Back Cinco, the fact that you're making a through line, from that history and kind of course correcting and being like, listen, enough is enough. We are not about nachos and margaritas, and those are delicious, but come on. Our culture, our worth is so much more to that. The struggle for autonomy and the caring for our land is so much more than that. And so with our fingertips, we're able to to share our own stories and tell our own histories, and then also be the stewards of histories like Cinco de Mayo and kind of set the record right. So can you tell us a little bit more about, why storytelling matters, why it's important that we assert our histories, and how that can serve to inspire and represent nuestra gente today?
I can take this one, Olivia.
We'll both respond because I definitely have something to say as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think again, it's history is an important cultural resource that we have just as a human, just existing as a human, right? This is again how we ground ourselves in just understanding existence, right? How as a people we came to be, who we want to be, how we and so I definitely agree that we're in an unprecedented time where we can control the means of communication, right? We can just send an Instagram story post, or y'all are doing with Latino Conservation Week, we can keep providing opportunities for people to like tap in and add their voice as well too. I think from the like historical and like public lands perspective as well too, you know, when people think of like parks, they don't really view them as an opportunity to like tell history. But actually, the National Park System does have historical and heritage designations to highlight historical contributions from different ethnic groups or different individuals. And so, you know, it's a win-win situation when we can preserve history, we can, you know, retain the cultural integrity of like the United States or the Western Hemisphere as a very diverse like geography. But at that same time, the hard data and even the like real world experience is demonstrating that like as a people, Latinos are being actively, like our history is being actively sabotaged. It's more than being forgotten. I think forgotten is a passive term that implies maybe just like age, like forgotten with age, or just like a more neutral tone. But we're actively being sabotaged. Our history is actively being erased. You know, like as a teacher, right? Like, you know, my books were extremely outdated. I had books that stopped in the late 1980s, and I was teaching in 2016. You know, like, but even like in the federal budget process, which like Green Latinos has increasingly been involved in over the last couple of months, the House of Representatives, controlled by the Republican Party, has just released last week a budget proposal to strike the authority of federal funds being used to highlight Latino history in the Smithsonian Museum, which is one of our most prestigious public, historical museums, right? And so we have like people baking into like policy that Latino history does not matter. Moreover, going back to the public lands and like park perspective, some statistics I wanted to share with you is that only 24 of the more than 400 national parks in this country specifically preserve Latinx history. And only 190 out of the 96,000 sites in the National Historical Register actually preserve Latino history as well too. And so we see statistically that Latino history is not valued on equal footing, that it's completely negating the fact that like our people are indigenous to this hemisphere, right? That we've been here contributing to the development of this country, right? But we're also seeing the policy loopholes in that Latinos are one of the only ethnic groups left that does not have a specific like cultural preservation program for the park system. And so when we think of the levels of the federal government and the Department of Interior and the National Park Service, all of these entities are public entities that are designed in name and authority to serve and represent every American. But as we see it now in 2023, this discrepancy is massive. And so Green Latinos is actively engaging in not only the budget negotiations as they are right now, which again, that could be its own hour-long webinar, but also like trying to support like more federal protections and more like park access, because not only again are we underrepresented in park protections, but also the Latino community is also affected by the nature gap, which means that like statistically, Latino communities are more likely than white communities, for example, to live in areas without parks, without a healthy environment. And we know many of the environmental, or most of the environmental injustices that people face are directly related to a degraded environment. And so what we're doing is trying to synergize all these main issues, right? Where we can protect our environment, we can increase access to nature's benefits, but also in that same stride, like represent, elevate, and celebrate the cultures and the individuals and communities that have undeniably contributed to us having a better future and even the present that we exist in right now too.
Olivia.
Yes. Thank you. I wanted to highlight a little bit of what the sort of best and worst outcomes look like when our stories are erased or when they're told. The import here, why storytelling matters, is that at the worst, without any stories of our experiences, of our lives, of that of our ancestors, of our cultures, of our communities, generations before, the value is diminished in the public eye. And at worst, that means that lives are lost. May 5th, in addition to it being Cinco de Mayo, is also the National Day of recognition of missing and murdered Indigenous women. There is an epidemic happening of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples broadly across the Americas. And anecdotally, it's well known that extraction, man camps that are happening on and near reservations and Indigenous communities are a contributor to violence pitted against Indigenous peoples. And for a long time, these folks' stories were never told. Not told by media, dismissed by the criminal justice system. And without the stories being told, there's no way for resources to make it for something that we know anecdotally about the impact of mining and extraction on the lives of Indigenous people to actually be data, to actually be well-known information so that this epidemic can be resolved. Likewise, throughout Latin America, Latin environmental defenders, land and water protectors are being disappeared and being murdered left and right. And you can bet that whoever is behind this violence, and depending on the in the area between like Mexico, Peru, Colombia, Brazil, some of the places that it's most dangerous to be a land and water protector in Latin America. The violators include the state and includes other groups of environmental offenders, a lot of perpetrators in these situations. But at the end of the day, you can bet that these folks don't want their stories to be told. They don't want the rest of the world to know that a person died for stopping a dam from being built or protecting a forest from being clear cut. And more acts of environmental defense that have been happening in Latin America over the past few generations, including the first one happening here with the death of Tortuguita, who was shot while in camp to defend the Weelaunee Forest of Atlanta, Georgia. So it's really important to tell our stories, the good ones, the bad ones, the ones that, regardless of what you think, how you think people might perceive it or value it, with our stories, when we're seen, because we're heard, we're become represented, we become valued, we're protected, and we have dignified places in our future. There is no future for our communities without our stories being told, individually, among our communities, and then institutionally as well. It's kind of a foundation or a chain of events that has to happen. Our stories aren't just our past, they are our futures as well. So just cannot say enough about how important it is that we are able to represent ourselves. We're able to represent our own cultures and histories and the stories that, are our own cultural properties, in order to be safe, to be able to keep doing advocacy afuera, as well as to be represented, to have dignified roles as public land managers and decision makers and educators, and as well as to see our stories being told on public lands, such as resolving the issue that Pedro referred to earlier with the just complete lack of representation throughout national park units for our Hispanic and Latino communities. So yo cuento, not just for the past, but also for our futures.
I love this conversation, and we're unfortunately running a little low on our time, but I wanted to say, like, Green Latinos and this conservation movement is so fortunate to have people like you, Olivia, and Pedro, so thoughtful and with such an incredible 360-degree view, humility that you approach the work with, and also consideration of those stories that aren't being told and the stories that need to still be told. So real quick, before I ask one last question, I just want to say thank you. Honestly, if we've got time for nothing else, I want to say thank you both. So then the last question is, we're on board. We're listening. We remember the Take Back Cinco hashtag. We follow Green Latinos online. We're members. We're subscribers. What can we do? What's our call to action?
The call to action is to get involved on Cinco de Mayo. Start thinking about your what you want to do during the month of May, and host an event, a cultural conservation event, an outdoor conservation event. Bring your community together on May 5th to actively fight back against cultural appropriation on Cinco de Mayo by celebrating it in ways that authentically honor the history of Cinco de Mayo and the battles that we're fighting today for our communities, for our health, and for our natural, more than human relatives.
Yeah. And I'd like to say two things. You can join our Public Lands and Ocean Colectivo. It's a group of environmental activists in the conservation and beyond space that Green Latino convenes as well too. You can find this on our website at greenlatinos.org. And then just like maybe more immediately, I could say just like do your best to fall in love with nature. Through love, we understand, and through love, we find infinite sources of energy to protect what matters most to us. And so, however you can do it in whatever way is accessible and means most to you, do your best to fall in love with nature. And I think a lot of things will fall into place after that.
Well, I want to thank you both for the history and, you know, for the past, the present, and the future of all of this. And speaking of the future, I would love to continue this and invite you both come back, and Green Latinos and Latino Outdoors have more of these conversations, not just during Latino Conservation Week and Cinco de Mayo, but throughout the year. There's so much work to be done, and we're so proud to be doing this work alongside you all. So thank you both, Olivia and Pedro, for being a part of this. Thank you for celebrating Advocacy Afuera, the 10th anniversary of Latino Conservation Week and 10th anniversary of Latino Outdoors with us. Have a wonderful day. And I thank you both so much for being here.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much, Latino Outdoors and Hispanics Access Foundation. It's wonderful to be a part of this all together.
Thank you. Bye.